Hi, Harriet. It's Stephanie. Can you hear me okay? Harriet, I just wanted to test your audio.
I can hear you.
Thank you. Harriet was messaging, so she just wanted to make sure that she can hear us.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. We're now on the record. It's 1 p.m. on Friday, 20th, 2025. This is Commissioner's Information Meeting and proceeding number 24A-0296E, Public Service Companies, Wildfire Mitigation and Power Safety Shutoff Plan. I'm Eric Blank, the Chair of the Commission. Can my colleagues introduce themselves for the record, starting with Commissioner Gilman?
Good afternoon, Commissioner Megan Gilman.
Hey there, I'm Commissioner Tom Plant.
Thanks. Before we begin, I would like to discuss why the Commission is holding this informational meeting. Given the quasi-judicial character of this proceeding, it was not practical for state agencies to participate as parties to provide their perspective on a proposed wildfire mitigation and public safety power shutoff plan. Nevertheless, the information these agencies will provide today is critical to the Commission and the parties in this proceeding. The information will help us understand how the agencies represented here today operate during wildfire emergency situations and how agency priorities and needs align with the strategies proposed by public service. This meeting is intended to focus on issues presented in PSCO's application that are important to state agencies, but that current interveners may not be able to provide. These issues include wildfire mitigation generally, coordination with state and local agencies, mapping, communication prior to, during, and after power shutoffs events, and during emergency events. Our hope is that the information presented will help create a more complete record. This is one of the first times that Commission has held an informational meeting as part of an adjudicatory proceeding. So to help set the stage, I will briefly explain how we expect this meeting will operate. We will first have the state agency participants introduce themselves and present their comments. Commissioners and advisors will then ask questions of the participants, and parties will then be able to ask additional questions. I want to be clear that this is not a formal adjudicatory hearing. It is an informational meeting to provide the Commission and the parties with important information that may otherwise have been left out of the record. The information presented in this meeting will be added to the record when necessary and appropriate with notice. This meeting will be recorded and broadcast on YouTube, and we have a court reporter who will create a transcript. Parties will be able to offer the information presented here into the record as they choose, subject to appropriate evidentiary procedures. To the extent information from this meeting is entered into the record, the commission will determine the appropriate weight to accord it. We're personally grateful to the state agency participants for taking the time to assist us. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. We certainly don't have all the answers and are here to listen and learn from you all. We'll try to limit each presentation to maybe 30 minutes, after which there'll be time for commissioner and advisor questions, as well as time for party questions. So with that, Ms. Crandall, anything you want to add before I turn it over to my colleagues for introductory comments?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just realized a glitch because we are doing a slightly different format of meetings inadvertently. The parties do not have the Zoom information. We are getting that out ASAP. So for the parties in the proceeding, if you would like to hop on, you will be receiving an email shortly.
Okay, and do you want me to wait or?
No, everybody is able to view this on YouTube, so hopefully we can just have people jump on shortly.
Okay.
Thank you.
Commissioner Gilman, any preliminary thoughts before we turn it over to Mr. Bookman?
Yeah, sure. Just wanted to, at the onset, appreciate each of you for joining us today and really sharing important information as we look forward, not just with the potential instance of wildfire and kind of the emergency situation that causes, but also with public safety power shutoffs and how those emergency situations vary. And I think this coordination and these perspectives are very helpful and very important to us, especially as we weigh what Public Service Company of Colorado intends to do moving forward to make sure it's the best integrated and planned out approach for the state as a whole. So very much appreciate all of your time and expertise that you're willing to share with us today.
Thank you, Commissioner Gilman. Commissioner Plant.
Thanks a lot for joining us. You know, this is such an important issue, as we've seen in the news repeatedly over many years. And you know, part of this plan is to not only mitigate the potential for ignition of wildfires from the utility infrastructure and notify people effectively and keep people safe. But as we're looking at building this system for the utilities, making sure that it integrates with anything that the state is doing. Anything that the state is doing will integrate with what it's doing, and making sure that we're really creating a component of a much larger system that's going to benefit everybody. And so really appreciate your participation today and helping us to understand what's happening in other parts of state government and how we can best assist that process and how that process can assist our process as well. So appreciate you being here.
Thanks to both of you. So I think we have 4 speakers today. Mr. Scott Bookman, Senior Director for Public Health Readiness and Response from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. Margarita Harden from the Colorado Resiliency Office. Mike Morgan from the Colorado Division of Fire Prevention and Control. And Vaughn Jones, Chief Wildland Fire Management Section from the Colorado Division of Fire Prevention and Control. So with that, Mr. Bookman, looking forward to it. You're up, sir.
All right. Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. I get to be the inaugural speaker in an inaugural thing. I feel a little bit of a weight on my shoulders here.
Hey, don't screw it up.
There you go. And I don't know if we're going with the formalities here of Mr. Chair, but I was just going to give some remarks and happy to go back and forth and answer questions as needed. And so, as you said, my name is Scott Bookman. I am the Senior Director for Public Health Readiness and Response at CDPHE. My role is to oversee the Division of Disease Control and Public Health Response, the Office of STI, HIV, and Viral Hepatitis, and then have a broader responsibility to ensure that CDPHE is prepared to respond to any and all health and environmental emergencies across the state of Colorado. We serve as the Emergency Support Function 8 Public Health and Medical Lead for the state of Colorado and the State Emergency Operations Center. And I'm going to spend some time today talking about the role CDPHE plays and how that integrates into this conversation. I've been in healthcare, emergency management, emergency response, and public health for more than 25 years. I've been with CDPHE for almost 6 years now. I had the honor of serving as the state's COVID-19 incident commander throughout the totality of the state's COVID response. Along with that, I served as CDPHE's incident manager for the Marshall Fire, Cameron Peak Fire, and any number of other public health and environmental emergencies over the last several years. As I get into my remarks, I want to be clear that I am not here to present any information about the risks of a emergency power safety shutoff versus a wildland fire, as outside of my scope. And my goal here today is to make sure that you all are aware that there are implications from a health and environmental perspective of instituting a power safety shutoff. I want you to know what those are, and want to really encourage that we are ensuring that we're undertaking the mitigation activities necessary when a power safety shutoff is implemented. Obviously, what I have seen in my work over the last several years is that there are devastating impacts from wildfires. The Marshall Fire was obviously a huge response within CDPHE. And so, again, no opinion, not trying to make any statements on, the risk benefit of the power safety shutoff, but there are implications of taking that action. So the mission of CDPHE is to advance Colorado's health and protect the places where we live, work, and play. CDPHE is comprised of about a dozen divisions that really do a significant amount of work across the state of Colorado. I'm going to assume that there's not a lot of familiarity down to a detail level about what that work is, so I'm going to give you a brief overview of that. And so within the scope of what we're discussing today, the Division of Disease Control and Public Health Response is the State Public Health Lab, our Office of Emergency Preparedness and Response, and then all of our disease control functions, communicable disease, immunizations, things like that. Our Health Facilities and EMS Division is a regulator, and so they regulate all of the acute care hospitals, nursing homes, long-term care facilities, and EMS providers in the state of Colorado. And then we have a number of environmental divisions that are responsible for ensuring the health and safety of our air, our water, and our soil. And those are our Air Pollution Control Division, our Water Quality Control Division, and then our Hazardous Waste and Materials Division. And so when we are working within CDPHE to respond to any type of preparedness activity or any exercise or real world event, we are bringing all of those divisions together to ensure that the state is prepared and able to respond to any particular issues. And so our Health Facilities Division is not only a regulator, they have a responsibility to ensure that if a healthcare facility is having any malfunctions in their physical plant, like they run out of power or water, the Health Facilities Division is responsible for ensuring that the residents of those facilities are cared for either in place or moved to a safe place. Our Water Quality Control Division is an active participant in all of our responses to floods and fires, making sure that people in the impacted areas have the water necessary to respond to the fire. And then also to make sure that there's safe drinking water immediately after and in the long term from any type of natural hazard. Our Air Pollution Control Division obviously provides air modeling, and provides hazard and risk assessments for people who are in areas impacted by wildfires or wildfire smoke. And then our hazardous materials division also is responsible for a lot of the debris management in the aftermath of any type of public safety emergency. So that is the scope of our work. We are on a regular basis working on incidents, small, medium, and large. And we are always in the place of preparing for what may come next. And so I'm here to represent the totality of CDPHE's body of work in this particular space, and have kind of gathered input from divisions across CDPHE to inform the decision-making here. And so let's start with health facilities. And let's talk about the impact of a power shutoff or the loss of power in a hospital. Hospitals have backup power, they have generators, but it doesn't necessarily power the entire facility. And so when a hospital loses power and they have to go on their generator, there is a reduction in the services that are available. Also, these generators are not able to run indefinitely. And so when we start talking about extended shutoffs, we start talking about the need to potentially evacuate an acute care hospital. That is an extremely rare event. Over the last 2 decades in Colorado, it's something we've only had to do 2 or 3 times. But the evacuation of a large hospital is a massive undertaking that comes with significant risk. The Health Facilities Division also regulates much smaller residential care facilities like assisted living facilities. Some of those are purpose-built facilities. They're modern, they're large, and some of them are small. Some of them are old they're old houses that have been converted to spaces where a handful of people live in assisted living, and they are cared for, and they are cared for well. But the infrastructure in those facilities is not necessarily there to ensure that all of the facility is on backup power. And so the generator may keep the heat and the water flowing, but they may not have lighting. And when you're talking about an older at-risk population, obviously the impact of losing light could result in people falling more frequently. And then the additional impact of a power safety shutoff in the broader health sphere is on people who are on home medical equipment. We see it very often with people who are on home oxygen. I started my career as a paramedic. I can tell you every time the power goes out, the volume of 911 calls goes up dramatically as we have to go transport people to the hospital who no longer have their oxygen concentrator functioning at home. And so every time the power goes out, we see an increase in 911 volume associated with people who are suffering from shortness of breath associated with their oxygen. They are then going to health facilities where they are, again, taking up precious resources. And so there is a cascade effect of what happens when power is lost in the community and people no longer have the oxygen that they need at home. So then going on to I'm just going to keep going on everything and assume we'll do questions at the end. Okay, all right, cool. So our water quality control division works on both drinking water and wastewater. Both of those types of facilities do have backup power. Again, the backup power is generator. It cannot run indefinitely, and the backup power does not necessarily power the systems to their full capacity. We see this. Yeah.
Can I just ask you a question on that? What does it mean not indefinitely? Is that like hours, days, and what's the limitation? Is it on-site fuel? Does it depend if the natural gas? If you could just give us a little background on what indefinitely means, because that's like going to be a huge issue for us. And if it's coming later, I apologize.
It's going to come later when I follow up in writing,
okay.
Because I think it may depend on the type of facility. kind of thought you might ask that question. And so we're going to get you that answer for it. I don't have it for you right now.
Okay.
Because I do think it depends on the size of the facility. And I think that, when we talk about the hospitals, when we talk about the long-term care facilities, yeah, I mean, the on-site fuel is a, significant impediment. It's storing a lot of fuel to run a system for a long period of time. And so we'll work with our water quality engineers to, get you information on what we can tell you about how long each system is responsible for having a backup service in place.
Thank you.
And we can also get you information when towards the end here, we'll talk about the first power safety shutoff that occurred in Boulder in 2024 and some of what we learned there. And so it's both drinking water and it's wastewater. And I think what's important to know in the wastewater space is that the systems are designed to run continuously. And so if they have a decrease in power, at some point, they start to back up. And there isn't necessarily a significant amount of holding space built into these systems. And so we can see wastewater start to back up into our drinking water system as well. So really some pretty significant risks associated with extended power shutoffs within our water quality systems. And then similar risks within our hazardous materials division. And so they're regulating landfills, Superfund sites. They all tend to have some pretty sophisticated groundwater treatment and containment systems built into those sites. And again, we'll get you the technical information here, but they also have backup power. It's not backup power that can run indefinitely. And so making sure that we have awareness of there's a certain period of time after which the implications of an emergency power shutoff will grow exponentially as we kind of lose these redundant systems. And then from an air pollution control division perspective, the biggest risk, and again, balancing the risk of emissions from a wildfire versus the risk of this is not what I'm here to talk about. But when we flip a hospital to a generator, it's usually a diesel generator at most of these facilities. And so we were talking about an increase in diesel emissions when we move to generator power. And then, in 2024, I think everybody is familiar with, Suncor went offline and there were pretty significant emissions associated with the power failure at Suncor and turning that facility back on as well. So that is, kind of the background for CDPHE. And I can tell you that in April of 2024, when we had red flag conditions in Boulder, Broomfield, Longmont area, and there was a power safety shutoff, we, the health and medical community, had a very busy day. And the 911 system was significantly tested by the increase in volume associated with people whose home oxygen was no longer functional. We started hearing from our health systems that they were being inundated by those patients who were coming in. And so we saw that particular impact. We did have a wastewater treatment facility in Boulder County that was just about to start overflowing. And luckily they had a storage tank that was offline for some interior work. And they were able to literally flip over into that particular holding tank and were able to prevent that backflow from occurring. And so, within CDPHE, we saw impacts across the spectrum during that power safety shutoff, and really wanted to make sure that the commission is aware that there are real implications from these decisions. And, I think wherever this goes, what is vitally important is real-time communication, the ability for local and state officials to have a direct line of communication to decision makers at the moment, to have real-time conversations of, hey, if we don't get power back to this wastewater station in the next 10 minutes, we're going to have a drinking water issue, and it is going to cascade down. So we need to be able to communicate real time, and we should be doing a significant amount of planning ahead of time between the utility company and the water and wastewater facilities in the jurisdictions that may be impacted by this. So thank you, and I am open to questions.
I'll start before turning it over to my colleagues. Do you think we've made the progress and accomplished the improved communication, real time, better planning? You outlined like 4 or 5 lessons learned. Do you think we're there?
I'm not there, but it doesn't mean that there globally we aren't there. I luckily since April of 2024 have become an acquaintance of Rebecca White and know that Rebecca will take my phone call in the midst of an emergency, and Rebecca will help me get in touch with Xcel Energy. And that is where my head goes, right? Do I have the person to call? If you ask my water quality control division if they are having preemptive planning meetings with Xcel Energy right now, I would say the answer is probably no. And so I think we really do need to emphasize that there are local implications, and then that there are implications for the state agencies that have a regulatory responsibility here, and making sure that we have all the right pre-planning and communication happening real time.
So if we were able to facilitate a conversation with Xcel and your water quality people, that would be one area where we could potentially help. I don't want to put the fate of water quality on Rebecca answering her cell phone in an emergency.
And again, we're learning here, right? This is new, and so this is not meant to be a critique in any way, shape, or form, or a criticism, as much as there is still room for optimizing how we do this work. It's the best time to exchange business cards is not in the middle of a disaster. We do a lot better when we break bread with people and meet with them ahead of time and prepare. And so I would emphasize that however this plan goes forward, there's a real emphasis on local, state, and public utility commission or public utility provider communication, both before, during, and after any type of event.
Well, if you can detail like almost down to the people level,
Yep.
Where you'd like to have direct contacts with the utilities, I think that would be very helpful for us, and then we can ask the utility and we can follow up and see if that's happened. So if you'd be willing to do that in writing, that'd be appreciated.
Of course. Okay, I've got 2 action items coming out of this so far. I don't know if I'm going to accept another invite. But yes, we will absolutely get you both information on the generators and kind of the duration of generators at different systems. And then, yes, absolutely, we will talk internally about what are the right connections that need to be made across all of these different areas so that we can reach out and we can begin this planning together directly. That would be greatly appreciated.
Commissioner Gilman, would you like to add to Mr. Bookman's to-do list?
That's not my main goal, but I have a couple questions. Just following up on the communications question and kind of ensuring that we've established the right, like, proactive communication strategy, and that everyone knows who each other are and who you call in a certain situation beforehand so that it can happen during an emergency, whether it's an actual wildfire or a PSPS or whatever. So I'm just curious, you've got like the wastewater bucket, well, water in total.
Yep.
And then healthcare, which kind of all flow through CDPHE. Thank you for the lessons. I appreciate it. And I'm curious, should that emergency structure involve CDPHE, whereby CDPHE or someone there is the clearinghouse for okay, a wastewater treatment plant is having a problem or knows they have 2 hours left or whatever it is and needs to get in contact with Excel. Same thing for a hospital in a critical situation. So should those communications flow through CDPHE in an emergency, or should it be like a direct line for each individual facility to public service in your best vision of it?
It may need to be both, to be honest with you. And I think that's what we should game plan out in some tabletop exercises before, as soon as humanly possible, right? This is a big, complex matrix response structure that we're talking about that includes local emergency managers, state emergency managers, local public health, state public health, and all of the regulatory, structures associated with this. In some places, you're going to have federal responders as well, from a Clean Drinking Water Act perspective. And so I think we need to sit down. And I think state needs to sit down, utility providers need to sit down, and we all need to really map out the right way to do this. But I don't want the state to be a pass through or a potential block if a utility company, if a water company needs to call Excel and get something turned back on right away. We shouldn't be standing in the way of that. We are here more to facilitate and to coordinate than anything.
Okay. And I think there are some current kind of customer representatives or something they're called, a public service company in Colorado that would deal with their largest customers. So like presumably if the wastewater treatment is run by the city of Boulder, the city of Boulder has this person's contact information. Do you have any information about like, does it need to be someone else? Like, is that not sufficient, or you really just want to get in a room and figure out kind of the right way to run it?
I think we need to get in a room and figure it out. We struggled in April of 2024, and we were getting reports in from a wastewater plant pretty much saying we are going to overflow soon, and nobody could get the right person on the phone to try to mitigate this thing. And we can do better than that. We can do better.
Okay.
So we need to figure that out. And I think multiple agencies at both the local and the state level need to know, here are the cell phone numbers of the 10 people that can help you solve a problem in 5 minutes, because that's what we were talking about.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks. And then just kind of same questions for healthcare and for water quality facilities. Do you all have a database or retain information about backup power, the type of backup power, the duration of backup power at each of these facilities?
That will be included in the list we send back.
Okay.
Kind of talking about the requirements down to a detail level in each type of facility. And so I'm going to need to follow back up with, if you're a hospital that has 100 beds, do you have a mandate that you can power X percentage of your facility for X number of time? Those are all standards that are not in my head today, but we can get you that information. And similarly, we can get you information for the water systems as well. I know that the particular wastewater system that I was referencing in Boulder, their redundant system, I guess, is they've got power coming in from 2 separate power substations, not necessarily from a backup generator, and both of those substations were turned off.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're going to need to work through some pretty technical stuff, and so we'll provide you with the best information we have.
Yeah, I think what I'm curious is understanding your requirements for each type of facility will certainly be informative to understand what is the floor that everyone's working on. But I'm also just curious if there is any list, if there is any database of the actual systems, what fuel type, You know, is it delivered fuel or is it on site?
Yep.
What's the duration?
Yep.
Just to try and wrap our minds around, and I think there are serious, you know, data security questions around who should have that information, where should it live? You know, is that something you all have, and then you share that with the utility when there's an issue, or does it live at the utility so they can understand? But just trying to wrap my mind around, like, knowing the minimum requirements is great, but like I'm the most interested in who knows what the actual systems are in like a more widespread way.
Yep,
Um,
absolutely. Yep, we can work on that.
My other question, and I think this is like my last one, then I'll turn it over to Commissioner Plant, is you had mentioned like a range of healthcare facilities, I think with different levels of criticality and needs and energy needs, honestly, also. And I'm curious, do you have like some sort of hierarchy, right? Like who's most important to get back on quickest? And it might be some sort of very complicated math with what their backup systems are and what duration they have, but understanding there's a really wide range in healthcare facilities. Is there a prioritization that you have or can help with as we try to understand the criticality of getting certain facilities online the quickest?
Yes, with a big asterisk of some of that will have to be determined real time. And some of those decisions can only be made in the confines of, okay, we have 10 facilities that are currently impacted, and we have to go through those 10 facilities and really understand who is in each one, what are the risks associated at that moment. And so, again, I think this would be part of that planning work that we would do with Excel ahead of time, is really kind of talking through, this is our escalation pathway. This is how we're assessing the situation. And so we could communicate, we've got 10 impacted facilities. These are the two that are most important right now, and talk that through. I think it's too variable to say, I'm not sure I can just say baseline, this facility is riskier than this
one. Okay, so it'd be in a case by case. Your group has the ability to provide a hierarchy in a certain situation, but it's probably not something that exists in a much broader way before.
I want to say, yeah, I think that's probably the right way.
Okay. Okay. That's it. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Commissioner Plant.
Thanks. This has all been really interesting, and you know, there's a number of one of the things that Commissioner Gilman was just mentioning around prioritizing those facilities, particularly critical facilities around, you know, public health with water and hospitals that are in you know, maybe the wild urban interface, you know, or you know, people, you know, places that are at high risk, is something that I think would be really interesting for us, because we've talked about the opportunity to establish or prioritize microgrid development in some of these areas where they're the highest risk areas. And when you talk about, you know, the water supply being impacted, that's certainly something that's pretty serious. And also, you know, obviously the hospitals. I was wondering, yeah, I mean, I know that you're going to get the information around how long these generators last, but certainly in that last PSPS, it went on for a few days. And I didn't know, did you get into a situation with the hospitals where you were needing to evacuate, or what happened in that last situation?
The hospitals were stable. We did not have to move anybody out of any hospitals. They went on diversion. They weren't necessarily accepting new patients. I would say, and I did hear about, it was either an assisted living or a skilled nursing facility that lost power. I don't believe they evacuated either. I would say that in that particular response, the single biggest impact was on people who are on home oxygen and were calling 911. And that was a pretty dramatic impact, and really stressed the 911 system. So if I was going to call out the two biggest issues that we had, would be the backup of that wastewater system almost overflowing into drinking water. And then the impact on the 911 system and emergency rooms from an influx of patients who were not on home oxygen. I will say that we were leaning forward enough that we were contemplating what would a hospital evacuation look like. And so, I mean, the resources that simply go into planning for what does it look like to evacuate a hospital, it's a pretty monumental undertaking to do it, on an emergent basis. And so it was a lot of time and effort with our team put into what would this look like.
Do you know what sort of planning there is in terms of refueling, for example, for ambulances? Do they require pumps to be operating? Do they operate off of the same generator facility that the rest of the hospital's on, or do they have their own separate facility?
Speaking from my personal experience here as paramedic, most of the ambulance services in the state are not getting their fuel at a hospital. And so, we would, when I was with the city of Denver, we got our gas from the city of Denver gas pumps. It's just diesel or gasoline. I mean, you can fill up your ambulance like you fill up a car. And so,
Do they need pumps though operating? Do they need
Yeah.
do they need electricity basically?
Yeah. I mean, they would need a working fuel station from somewhere.
And is there, in the event of a power system shut off, we don't have electricity flowing through the lines, is there a facility that's designated that is a source for ambulances to get refueled?
Not that I'm aware of. We're also well outside of my lane here, but I am not aware of a dedicated facility with dedicated power. My first thought is if I'm in that zone where the power is shut off, I would just drive, my ambulance down to Denver and go to the gas station. That's how I would refuel.
Yeah. And do you know what happens in terms of things like cell towers when the power is out?
I don't. That one's outside my lane. Sorry, I don't know.
Did the cell phones continue to work during the PSPS last time?
They certainly did to some level because I was having cell phone calls with people who were in Boulder while the power was off. So there was definitely some type of service working.
Okay, great. Thanks. I was just curious about those things. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner Plant. Ms. Crandall, any questions for Mr. Bookman?
Yes, thank you very much. And just before I ask, I did want to let anybody know watching, we have got the email out with the Zoom link if parties are participating consistent with the commission's decisions. This is open to those who are parties in the case to ask clarifying questions. Yes, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about your experience in the emergency operations side, because I think it sounds like a public safety power shutoff could be localized, like it could, be within a county or just cover one or two areas. And so how does that look if it's like a smaller PSPS, and is that local OEMs are the ones coordinating on critical facilities? Like at what point would the state become involved?
Yeah, it's a great question. Obviously, all incidents are local until the resources of the local jurisdiction are no longer capable of responding to that particular incident. With that, CDPHE, Health Facilities Division, has a regulatory responsibility to hospitals and other facilities that they regulate, independent of local action. So CDPHE has responsibility to ensure that if a nursing home loses power, that those residents are safe And if they can't be kept safe there, that they are moved to another facility. And so that is a responsibility independent of local jurisdiction or not. And then again, with our water quality control division, our air pollution control division, they have regulatory responsibilities, regardless of where the incident occurs. So I think you're getting then more into that, truly into that emergency management space. And I would say, yes, it's local until the resources of that local jurisdiction are impacted. Or if it is covering multiple jurisdictions, sometimes the state serves in a coordinating role to help, multiple counties come together in a singular response.
And so if you have a couple of counties, could they have radically different priorities for restoration, or when it comes to these sorts of facilities, or is it fairly close and it may just be an incident by incident consideration?
I think the priorities would be generally aligned across any jurisdiction, right? We are talking about life safety issues. We're talking about life safety issues in healthcare and residential settings. And we are talking about access to clean water and clean air. And so I would say in that particular space, while we may have different tactical decisions, county by county, depending on the incident, from a priority perspective, I think we would all be on the same page.
Thank you. And we've heard a couple of times oxygen concentrators and access to oxygen. Is there anything you could talk about with how an individual resident might prepare ahead for an outage when oxygen is an issue?
I mean, people are able to, also have oxygen tanks at home. And so, when my father-in-law was on supplemental oxygen at home, right? He has the concentrator that he plugs into the wall. And when he's at home, that's what he's working off of. But when he would go out in public, he would lug one of the little green tanks behind him. And so, he would have a couple of backup tanks at home that would get him through a couple of hours, right? And I think that's what we're talking about here is what is a reasonable level of preparedness for an average human living at home? How much oxygen are they going to keep on hand? What is an appropriate period of time that people should be self-sufficient? And what is their capacity to do so?
I appreciate it. I think those are all the questions I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Do any of the parties have comments for Mr. Bookman? Hearing none. I just want to thank you for visiting with us and appreciate the help. And hopefully we can, if there is a next time, we can do better next time. So thank you, sir.
Thank you for the opportunity. If you have any follow-up questions, please reach out. I've got my homework assignments. We'll get it back to you as soon as we can. And thank you for taking the time to listen. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate you.
Okay.
Cheers. Let's see. I think our next speaker is Margarita Harden from Colorado Resiliency Office. Take it away, ma'am.
Great. Hi. Thank you, Chairman Blank and commissioners for having me today. It's just Marguerite, although I do accept margaritas anytime.
You're going to be Miss Harden.
Sounds great. So yeah, hi everyone. My name is Marguerite Harden. I am with the Colorado Resiliency Office. We are based within the Department of Local Affairs, and I'm happy to share some of our expertise related to the filings today. I just do want to provide a disclaimer that my directive was that I could just share background information on what our office does and how it relates to the filings without necessarily reading the filings in depth. So I did focus mostly on the executive summaries, images, there was a video, and just don't want to be seen as knowing everything that Excel is doing or the approach that they're doing. So I am a little bit of a visual person. I just have this short slide deck I'll share after sharing today. And yeah, after introducing the office that I'm in and our work, I will go into some background as it relates to the filings. So the Colorado Resiliency Office was established after the 2012 and 2013 fires and floods. And we have, been around in order to use proactive measures in advance of disasters or shocks or stressors that Colorado is facing. And we really coordinate across state agencies to do that work, as well as across local, state, federal, and private and non-governmental partners to ensure that our communities are more resilient to those disasters and that we are adapting to a changing environment, social and economic conditions. Our office is guided by the 5-year plans that you see pictured here, or the frameworks that set a resilient strategy for the state and our partners. In 2018, our office was moved from the governor's office over to the Department of Local Affairs. We sit within the Division of Local Government, and so we do create a bridge between local and state government through a model of having field managers that are from those regions to represent and work with those local governments. So the local government impacts of public safety power shutoffs are a part of what we have seen and understood. I know that a lot of local governments joined a lot of hearings and public comments related to the April 2024 public safety power shutoffs. And so I'm not going to focus on that today, although that is a part of our office's oversight at the Division of Local Government. So yeah, in 2018, our office was codified in statute, and a definition of resilience was also adopted in statute, and that definition is pictured here. I'm not going to read this slide, but essentially it is not just to rebound from disasters, but to positively adapt to them as well, and taking a really holistic approach to resiliency. And so the CRO role as defined in statute is also listed here. This image on the right sort of shows and illustrates how we think of resiliency, which is in a very holistic way. And so, for example, infrastructure resilience is just one piece and one sector within this flower in the middle of the diagram. We also see resilience as very important to think about it in a community way, an economic way, a health and social way, watersheds and natural resources. So, this is important because resilience could be a buzzword. It could be thought of in very different ways. And we think this really holistic definition is an important approach. And that's how we integrate resilience in communities and state work. And yeah, we see climate change as a force multiplier of a lot of the impacts across these sectors that are going to be seen from natural hazards, economic hazards, housing, all of the impacts that climate change is wreaking on our communities and our economies. So within the state, there's 3 major plans that I see relating to the filing in discussion today. The first is that 5-year framework that we are about to be updating. It was released in 2020. We'll be updating it this year. And it really sets strategies across 4 key areas as written here. But besides that, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about the microgrid roadmap, which was just filed in January, last month. And that came out of House Bill 22-1249. And we worked really closely with the Colorado Energy Office, who was the lead on this. And part of the reason why we, as the Colorado Resiliency Office, worked with them on that is that we do have a funding program called Microgrids for Community Resilience that I'll also go into more detail on. And then finally, we have a more recent office that was established in the governor's office, and they developed this Colorado Climate Preparedness Roadmap that also documents a lot of cross-state agency actions related to climate adaptation. So speaking a little bit more to some of these grid resilience funds, the CRO, again, partners closely with the Energy Office to administer this funding. The large majority of this funding, about 25.6 million to date, comes from the Department of Energy Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or bill, which, as you, I'm sure, know, has been frozen or in jeopardy. And we are still actively granting out these dollars. You can see the map on the right where some of the existing contracts that have been obligated to communities have gone. But the first is that Microgrids for Community Resilience program that is administered by us at the Colorado Resiliency Office. And then the other two funds, the grid hardening for small and rural communities and advanced grid monitoring, are administered by the Colorado Energy Office. And if you click on this map, it will show what is actually happening in each of these points. But the grid hardening grants for small communities, we've seen mostly going towards undergrounding of electrical equipment, as well as vegetation management, distribution line and equipment modernization and replacement. And all of them pretty much have a wildfire mitigation component to them. So similar to what is seen in Excel's filing. Then advanced grid monitoring, these grants have been going towards technology for fire monitoring and prevention, for example, satellite or drone analysis and management, and grid modeling. And these grants also go to distribution pole sensors and advanced metering infrastructure. So finally, one other role that we have that does relate to this filing is that we at the Colorado Resiliency Office do sit on the Wildfire Resiliency Code Board as ex officio or non-voting members. I'm an alternate. The director of the Colorado Resiliency, Ann Miller, who couldn't be here today, is the official ex officio member on that code board. And that code board was established by Senate Bill 23-166. And, we have been meeting for about 18 months to determine what these codes are, which are really focused on new construction and significant remodels that are in the wildland urban interface. And this board has been directed to define where that wildland urban interface is. And we are using a tool that has been developed by the Colorado State Forest Service. And I know Daniel Beveridge is presenting tomorrow, so I won't go into any detail on that. But would just highlight that within that Senate bill, the PUC is mandated to consider application of the codes when carrying out the public utilities law, carrying out and implementing its policies, procedures, and decisions, and meeting any requirements under its jurisdiction. So structures within the wildland urban interface, it's not just homes or businesses, it's also structures, are going to be under these rules. All right, I will see no questions. Feel free to jump into some of the background that I wanted to pull out based on the filing. So I did mention the definition that we use in this circle diagram and this holistic approach to resiliency that we take at our office. I did notice in the wildfire mitigation plan that there's a lot of reference to system resiliency, and the way that this is defined really just appeared a lot more internal, when you compare the two definitions of resilience, and that there's a much more infrastructure-based definition of resilience. So that is really just that one gray circle within that internal flower. It's not really taking that holistic approach to resilience. So this approach to resilience really leaves out community resilience, economic resilience, public health impacts. So, these actions that under system resiliency of targeted undergrounding, line rebuilds, they're very important to wildfire resiliency. However, just thinking about built infrastructure, not taking this cross-sector approach could be seen as short-sighted. And also system resilience actions seem more like something any utility should be doing on an ongoing operational basis. And we really think about resiliency as having long-term intentions and impacts, not short-term. And so, it just comes to question for me, what of this is ongoing maintenance and what of this is really part of a wildfire resiliency plan or one-time plan. Here on the right-hand column, I also just wanted to point out how FEMA defines risk versus how the Wildfire Mitigation Plan defines risk. And it is similar. You could see this risk matrix with likelihood and consequence in the top right corner. And likelihood and consequence is also being used within the Wildfire Mitigation Plan. However, if you look at consequence here in the WMP, it focuses on safety, reliability, and financial impacts. And these are, again, all internal to the utility. There's also the public health, economic, and community and environmental impacts as well, where if those elements are used within a risk matrix, might change the prioritization of some projects. And so, I think it's important to be thinking of that holistic approach again. And then looking at likelihood under here in the bottom right, historic trends are not going to fully be indicative of the more frequent and extreme events that scientists foresee. So using a climate model for determining likelihood may be more prudent than historical impacts. So jumping into the microgrid roadmap, and we do have a policy brief that as I share these slides, you can dig through. But as previously mentioned, this roadmap was just published last month. We at the Energy Office and Resiliency Office will be presenting the roadmap to Senate and House committees next week. And we recognize that microgrids are just one method for improving grid resilience and reducing the impacts of public safety power shutoffs. And they should be taken in conjunction with a suite of other solutions. But especially because of the public safety power shutoffs, microgrids are, we think, an important solution. And this policy brief summarizes some of the policy pathways that are listed in the microgrid roadmap and provides national examples of what other state legislatures or PUCs are doing in order to regulate the utility. So it is more from a regulatory perspective than a utility perspective. But of course, any utility could be doing these actions more proactively. So for example, the roadmap calls out these 5 major areas of need that are listed here. This third need is the need to better value resilience. And that means attaching a price tag to them. This was a major takeaway of the roadmap. So we do see microgrid projects being negotiated with Excel for compensation, for example, around peak shaving benefits when a battery can provide that ancillary need. And for example, we see the city and county of Denver doing that with the Central Park microgrid that's being attached to one of their rec centers that we are helping to fund through the Microgrid for Community Resilience program. However, this also happens on a case-by-case basis, and there's a bit of a lack of a transparency and a long runway for those negotiations of determining how large of a battery is required, how much those payments will be, et cetera. And so, the roadmap really calls for a better and more consistent valuing of those services. Also, the number 4 and 5 here on clarifying ownership structure and updating interconnection. There really is no clear interconnection policy for microgrids, and these battery systems often have to be pre-approved to be grid tied, and that process can be lengthy. It could be denied after substantial planning and investment has already been put in. And so, those are some ways we think a utility could better partner with local partners as they develop these microgrids. So here's a little bit of background. I've already been talking about microgrids a lot, so hopefully you don't need this full definition here, but this is how we define it. A group of interconnected loads connected to a power supply or generation with a microgrid controller that's able to be islanded from the grid, as well as be grid connected. So we have been running this program for a few years and are doing a lot of learning from it. And these are on the left, a list of some of our more publicly as well as not publicly announced awardees. So far, we have awarded about $16.1 million to not only utilities, but also local governments and community anchor institutions, such as healthcare facilities. And so we are seeing an increased demand for these. And that's been great because the microgrid roadmap also called for a greater education around microgrids so that local partners really understand their uses and where and when they can be best applied and how to really make that sort of an investment. We do see a lot of early adopters of microgrids in Colorado. Some utilities around the state have been really proactive in engaging their communities to inform them on the resiliency needs. For example, in the Southwest, the San Miguel Power Association has supported 4 planning grants and 5 construction grants for their communities. There's a lot of terminal lines there that we see this is a good application for microgrids. And so, yeah, just early stages in this, but a lot of early adopting utilities are coming on board. In order to determine where these projects will be best suited, we do have a pretty thorough project scoring and mapping tool. And again, we use a really holistic approach and our resilience criteria and framework in order to think about how we should be prioritizing these projects with limited funding. And so we don't only think about the grid vulnerabilities or the infrastructure vulnerabilities, but also the climate risks and vulnerabilities, how likely the region is to see a wildfire, or flood, or other impact that may impact the grid, as well as social vulnerabilities, such as we use the Colorado EnviroScreen tool to define disproportionately impacted communities. And, I did want to flag that Excel, they led some microgrids. These were noted in our microgrid roadmap. And I'm sure there's others, including, for example, the Panasonic microgrid that they developed that I'm not listing here. But there were 7 that were awarded back in 2021. And this is how they scored those projects. And, those projects really led to some really great microgrids in some great locations: Denver International Airport, Denver Rescue Mission, different community centers and rec centers. There was an open call for application, and this approach really does benefit some of the early adopters who already are familiar with microgrids in their application. Something I would just question about running, if they were to run this process again, is, how did Excel conduct outreach to some of those most vulnerable regions? How did they prioritize those regions? Is Excel sharing information or data on where grid infrastructure is most vulnerable? At this point, our applicants don't have a lot of that intel unless they are the utility. And we are working also with anchor institutions and local governments that don't have that intel. And then, does Excel have their own strategy for microgrids, and did these projects advance that strategy? It seemed like it was being an open call, really up to local communities to have their own strategy around energy resilience. And so, in other words, did local interests match Excel's interests? And could there be more of a partnership or collaboration or to align those interests? So here, I just also wanted to focus on some technical assistance that we have been leading, and this advances some of the that education that's needed. We have a lot of online resources. We also elevate other federal and state TA programs. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on this last bullet, which is our critical facilities prioritization process, which also came out of the microgrids roadmap. And we created this process in order to support communities in inventory and prioritizing their critical infrastructure, so that when they're making these large investments, they're doing it with all partners involved. So a critical part of this process is this first step on developing a committee and process, which it intends to break down the silos between utility, local governments, and emergency management, as well as community members. It is required that the utility be a part of these processes in prioritizing these facilities. The utility plays an important role in sharing infrastructure vulnerabilities, as well as historical information about electricity and fuel outages in the community over the previous 5 to 10 years. And some communities have identified buildings they would like to understand the infrastructure risk around. So far, we have supported Phillips County in the Northeast in doing this process, where 2 municipal utilities, Holyoke and Hoxton, participated, and Highland Electric Association was also participating in that. And it was really helpful to hear from the utility perspective as to what they saw the vulnerabilities as, in order to compare that with where emergency management and community perspectives thought their vulnerabilities and needs were. We'll also be supporting other communities here in 2025 with this process. So in thinking about the technical assistance and community engagement piece of this, we find it helpful within the Resiliency Office to think through the framework of this spectrum of public participation, where sometimes it really is necessary and important to just inform a community. Other times it's really important to empower a community. And the way I saw some of the engagement that Excel was doing in this space, being more on the inform and empower ends of this spectrum. So this in the bottom left corner is a screenshot from their wildfire mitigation plan that captures some of the community outreach that they did. And when you read it, it really leads to the conclusion that they did a lot of informing the community what they were doing, not necessarily having a listening session about what that community needs. And so this critical facilities prioritization process really calls for a more collaborative approach to defining where these investments can be made. Whereas those Excel microgrid grants were more on the empower side. They said, you tell us what you need and we'll fund you. It didn't sound like there was a huge partnership model in that, although I wasn't involved in the process either. All right, moving on, I wanted to just share how the microgrid roadmap also frames these microgrids, which is actually helpful, having listened into Mr. Bookman's presentation in thinking about how hospitals really fall into this level 2 partial feeder, oftentimes where critical loads are just being powered by a battery backup system or other system. And we also see a lot of this level 1, which is really just a single building, and we are promoting that a lot with resiliency hubs, where at times of a power shutoff, the community can know that a rec center or community center within their region will still have power. And then the other end of the spectrum is this level 3 community or full feeder. And, below here are examples of each of these levels that we have funded, and these are specifically in Larimer County. There's a case study that we developed around this. But in thinking about these 3 different levels, the utility can be playing different roles, which I've captured here. In level 1, they can support that interconnection process and provide the valuation and economic benefits for that if they can be available. Level 2 for the partial campus feeder, not only can they be doing that interconnection process, but they can also be doing community engagement and awareness around the availability of that power backup. And in level 3, it really requires that utility to play a lead role in developing that on more the utility side of things. So microgrid benefits, probably fairly apparent to this group, but we have a few different ways of thinking about it. First here is communications resilience. We saw, for example, with the Lahaina fire in Hawaii, that when that fire happened, communications went down, and that's what really made the public health and, just response to the fire, a real tragedy, where community members didn't know a fire was happening or know where to go or how to get in touch with their emergency managers. And so we have awarded a project to San Miguel Power Association for the utility office, which does provide communications so that communication equipment can still be maintained even if the grid goes down, which is something that they were faced with before. And then an additional benefit is grid reliability and resilience, which is just as it seems. And economic resilience and cost savings. We see that a lot of these microgrids can ensure that businesses are run, which we know from the PSPS situation last year, that a lot of businesses lost inventory, and so the larger campus or full feeder level 2 or level 3 microgrids can really support a lot of businesses and maintaining power and, not having those financial losses. Education and engagement. We have a microgrid in City and County of Denver going in at a school, which can help students understand the value of this and pass that education on to their community members. Of course, the environmental and public health benefits of a microgrid. We are working with some health centers to help them get a battery backup system, which can go beyond, the limitations of the fuel that can run out during a power outage, especially if it's tied to solar and has a number of hours of backup. And of course, a microgrid can support vulnerable populations, which is the intention for a number of the microgrids we see, but especially this one in the City of Westminster, where it's supporting a mature adult center. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about these FEMA community lifelines, which is another way of thinking about the resilience of this and importance of energy and power being available. So, energy is one of these 8 community lifelines, but it really plays a critical role because if this lifeline fails, it has cascading impacts down to communications, as discussed, health and hospitals functioning, etc. And Excel's Wildfire Mitigation Plan calls for enhanced interactive web maps reflecting power outages. I would be interested in seeing this sort of an interactive map go beyond that, because communities really need to know not only where the power is out, but where they can access power during a power outage. So my questions would be if this web map and PSPS alert can include facilities that have microgrids or adequate backup power in the time of an outage. Will those facilities be mapped in partnership with local governments? Will Excel be promoting those facilities proactively, even during blue sky days when there aren't power outages, and so on? More icons here, and then I'm almost done. We at the Resiliency Office think about these 9 resilience prioritization criteria as ways of assessing if a project or plan is resilient. So we encourage these criteria to be thought of as a system, not individually, and it's not a checklist, but a way of thinking about and incorporating resilience into projects and plans. So again, this long-term and lasting impact icon for me, when I read the Wildfire Mitigation Plan, which appears to be just a 2-year plan, I would just encourage utilities to know about the extreme weather events, that they'll become more frequent and more severe, that are these, every few years, wildfire mitigation plans being incorporated into regular business operations and ongoing maintenance, rather than one-time plans and one-time funding allocations. So with that, here's my contact information as well as others from the team I work with. And I'll be sure to share these slides. Happy to take questions.
thanks. Maybe I'll jump in first and just sort of ask you the same question I asked Mr. Bookman. On your microgrids, how long do you sort of plan for backup power, and does it matter on the use as like a hospital? I mean, can a hospital even rely on a microgrid as backup? I mean, I was sort of going through the size of the batteries versus the size of the solar and trying to think how long things last, how long a fully charged battery could last. But do you have any thinking about how long a shutoff could be and how it varies by end use and how you structure the battery size to do it? So any guidance or rough advice you can give us?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because we worked closely with CDPHE to actually try to find that answer out during the microgrids process. And I believe that the FCC has mandated about 8 hours of backup power, no matter what that source is, whether that's fuel or battery. But we, with the microgrids process and the grant program, really leave it up to the grantee and the applicant to define what their critical load is. We don't come in and audit that work. We do refer them to contractors and others that can help them to assess the best design for that. But we aren't really coming in and telling them the number of hours that they should have. We do prioritize renewable tied batteries because of the potential for that system to be powered longer term if the sun is shining, rather than just the number of hours that battery is holding at that time, or that, the amount of fuel that is in that tank at that time. But yeah, otherwise we haven't really gotten. I'm also curious to see what Scott Bookman's response is to the different types of facilities and the amount of hours that they're required to have.
I appreciate it. So I guess the way to think about you guys is you're a resource that can help us solve some of the problems, and you're laying out the landscape, and we, as part of this process, it's one piece of the solution and resources we can take advantage of. It is, yeah,
I would agree.
Commissioner Gutman.
Yeah, curious. So kind of comparing what you're working on to what Mr. Bookman's working on, and he had talked about kind of having this proactive structure and exercises to understand who does what, who talks to who, what does that chain look like in an actual emergency situation. I feel your role is much more like thinking much further ahead of time. How do we prevent? How do we understand where the vulnerabilities are, understand where critical facilities are, understand where people would shelter? What's our plan like as a community to deal with an event, whether the event is an actual wildfire or a PSPS, or something even different. So I'm curious, it seems like through your microgrid process, maybe those conversations have started in certain communities, but I worry they're not happening in a whole lot of communities. Like any sort of coordinated approach around where would the shelters be? How do they have power? How do the gas stations have power? How do we critically get people where they need to be in an emergency? And so I'm curious, is there any sort of good model out there? Do you all work to facilitate any of that to help the hundreds and hundreds of communities in the state kind of assess and come up with their own plan?
Yeah. So, well, to answer the first part of your question, we do take a really proactive approach to thinking about disasters. We want, things to be in place before that disaster hits. We do also have a recovery support function. It's not as much my role, but someone else in the office that does that, as well as in the Department of Local Affairs. So we do have that role at the time of a disaster to be supporting local governments. In terms of, I share that same fear that, yes, it's really early adopters and not necessarily the most vulnerable or most high need communities that are doing a lot of this work. And so the microgrid roadmap does prioritize regions that we see based on different criteria that our consultant used, maybe SAFE or other metrics that define vulnerability, as well as the social vulnerability metrics through Colorado EnviroScreen and others that have created some hotspots for us to make sure that those regions are being targeted with outreach for not just our grant funding, but for planning processes around this work. And so we do have some direction in that work, but I do also think this critical facilities prioritization process is something that will help, and we do help facilitate, like we actually go out to the communities to facilitate that process, although it is a DIY kind of, they can take our guidance and create their own process with partners to determine where their, infrastructure vulnerabilities, social vulnerabilities, and climate vulnerabilities all lie. So yeah, we do support them in that process, but it is really up to those local communities and their utility to be partnering on that work. And yeah, there's just different levels of participation, awareness, and all of that. Did that answer your question? Or
yeah, I think largely, I mean, I get, like, I think every community is going to have to do it themselves, but some communities are really, really small, and just trying to figure out, do we have like a roadmap they can follow to say, here's how to assess your own community and come up with a plan. And I think if I'm understanding from you, there's some critical information from utilities that would be helpful. I mean, even understanding potentially the intricacies of what's attached to the same circuit or the same substation. So if you have an outage, you know where to move to.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do encourage those smaller communities to be thinking more regionally, knowing that they don't necessarily have the capacity, but also to be thinking about a network of these resilience hubs or other, places people can go to have power on gray sky days or during power shutoffs or disasters. We did support an effort recently along the North Front Range that was for thinking about these resilience hubs or spaces that have power in a networked type way. And that effort brought together communities from Englewood up to Fort Collins and had them really think strategically around ensuring that there are a spread of options and that they are supporting the most vulnerable communities within that region. We also have done a lot of regional planning with communities and have let them lead on what their priorities are. So not everyone has said like, oh, power outages is our priority. But there have been some communities that have prioritized things like broadband, which is really reliant on the power system. And we've heard that, when there is sometimes a line that goes down, they are surprised by where things are going out. And I mean, I'm sure you know that as well, but I think that is why the utility participation is really important, because they understand the circuits and feeders that are causing the outages in places that they're happening. But yeah, the local governments and emergency management who need to be responding to this are oftentimes in the dark, quite literally, like about how and why those different areas were down. And so, I think having the utility present in these conversations is important so that emergency managers can be more prepared and understand this. I realize that there is a security issue around not sharing, the whole blueprints for the whole utility grid. But I do think having greater participation at the local level and with community partners can alleviate some of that.
Okay. And just one more question from me. As you're looking at resiliency and whether it's microgrids or just more broad community planning, I suspect those critical facilities, in addition to kind of the medical facilities and water type facilities we talked about with Mr. Bookman would probably also include police, fire, the actual emergency center itself. You have to be able to communicate out, accept the 911 calls, which I understand are at an incredibly increased volume. So are those part of what you're seeing in communities who are working on this, like including all those types of facilities as the critical?
Yeah, they are. And I didn't mention another fund that we have that is outside of the microgrids for Community Resilience Fund, but we at DOLA have the Energy and Mineral Impact Fund, or EIAF, and we had a set aside focused on a climate resilience challenge. Those funds are really only eligible to local governments and special districts, and those funds have been used more for those emergency operations, fire departments, police, sheriffs. We do have United Power that we're funding for their fire stations to have microgrids, a number of fire stations in vulnerable communities specifically to have microgrids. But yeah, they are our partners, and people we're encouraging to incorporate power backup at their facilities. So yeah, both public facing facilities as well as local government operations and the back end there are thinking about the need for this.
Okay, excellent. And just kind of same question I had for Mr. Bookman. You all don't tally or keep any sort of or collect data about the backup in any of these critical facilities to kind of understand what they have available.
We do not. Yeah, that was part of like the fact finding during the microgrid roadmap that we were hoping to find that sort of information, but we really have not seen it anywhere. Yeah, I would be really interested in that, along with understanding, not just allowing communities to decide like if they want a level 1 microgrid, but allowing utilities to create a strategy around where and when level 1, 2, or 3 microgrids are appropriate, where they already exist, where they need to exist. We just don't really see that level of planning at the utility or local or state level.
Thank you so much. On to you, Commissioner Point.
Thanks. And thanks for your presentation. I'm learning a lot today. This is great. One of the things that, obviously we've got this wildfire mitigation plan. There's a whole range of things that the utility is proposing to integrate into their processes, which obviously, have benefits outside of just the utility. And one of the things that you mentioned, that there's various risk evaluation and modeling tools in the WMP, and there's components that I think you said are internal to the utility. I think we heard some similar things around cameras, for example, that they're proprietary. And are there ways that we should think about these various different modeling tools, and how they might integrate better with the tools that you're using or the tools that other agencies in the state are using, so that we can have a more sort of consolidated system and not build one over here in the utility and build one over here in the towns and build,
Yeah. I mean, I think that level of coordination would be really helpful. I don't see it necessarily happening in a huge way, but my last slide was on those 9 resilience criteria. Another one of them is co-benefits. And we think about, how can we, not fund the utility for their own cameras. And then, we're about to, with the Wildfire Resilience Code Board, be empowering and encouraging not only local governments, but also the state to be doing monitoring and evaluation of vegetation management and defensible space around new construction. And we're considering getting a satellite imagery subscription. And are there opportunities for those efforts to be intertwined, for there to be cost effectiveness around sharing some of that? Could emergency management access some of the cameras that the utility is installing? I think those are all really important questions for us to be thinking about so that ratepayers are maximizing their benefits and emergency management is gaining more of that insight and intel. Yeah, I don't necessarily see that coordination happening yet, but I would encourage it.
I wonder, as thinking about this, would it be better to think about this as a state system within which the utility has a component, as opposed to the utility building its system, and maybe it integrates and coordinates with other things that the state has, but more of a sort of an umbrella that's at the state level, and some of it is picked up by this utility, other utilities are a component in a different place. How should we think about that? Or is that an unrealistic sort of hope from the state level? Or is that something that people at the state level are discussing? Or
It's not something I've been discussing, but I think it's an important, idea that we could incorporate into some of our planning. Yeah, I have joined certain cross-sector, more like telecom, broadband, utility conversations where transportation, they talk about this a lot with like the dig once policies, like how efficient it can be if like it's not just the utility digging once, but you have then all the other wires, running and transportation being improved at that same time, and just that level of coordination needing to happen. In order for, it to be a state system, I think, our funding, it seems easier for the utility to fund and, make these things happen. But could we play a coordinating role? I think that would be great.
One last thing that sort of came to mind, and one of the things that my colleagues and I have repeatedly talked about, is how a lot of these different proceedings tend to bleed into each other. But in thinking about your comment about having more partnership and collaboration with the utility and identifying these microgrid projects in a different proceeding, the distribution system planning proceeding, they're identifying areas of their distribution system that are under capacity constraints, that and these are areas we're not talking now about, the resiliency of the hospital or something during a power shutoff, but an actual asset to the grid that can be offered in the times when it's not in an emergency. And those are areas where I think the utility might be able to help prioritize projects that are going to provide this resiliency in an emergency situation, but in the times that they're not an emergency, it actually provides a positive value to the entire utility grid, both addressing maybe peak loads, addressing peak capacity constraints, all these different types of things as we're seeing increased load on the system. And so I would just say that as you're hopefully we're developing more collaboration with the utility, that may be another area in which the utility can provide some guidance on prioritization and also provide that co-benefit.
Yeah, I think that's the sort of intel local governments and others don't have as to where those circuits are that the most infrastructure and grid benefits can be. And I think, if there can be financial benefit or payback for those batteries, I think that would move it up on the priority list. A lot of these microgrids that we're funding, we do not think would happen. Like the cost just far exceeds the perceived benefits based on just what the technology is. And so I think anything that helps bring that price point down is helpful. Obviously, the state funds, the federal funds, the IRA tax credits, should they continue, have all made these projects possible. We've heard that they wouldn't really be financially feasible without those aids. So I think even just having like a more transparent understanding of where those circuits are would help as well.
Yeah, for sure. Then the DSP, I think, they're proposing something like $4 billion.
Wow.
Is that about right? So it's being proposed. So yeah, there's definitely a value there. And my last question in the microgrid roadmap, you did some different state examples and case studies in there. One of them was the Hawaii PUC and their HECO sort of plan for microgrid expansion. Are there any lessons that you can think of from that example that we can sort of apply here at our commission that would be beneficial?
I am not that well versed in that one. So yeah, we can follow up. Our team can follow up.
Great.
Someone else who knows that better.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
I appreciate it too.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Crandall, any questions?
A couple, thank you very much. With the grant program, are there any facilities that are so critical that you don't think they'd apply or they wouldn't, might not get an award, like defense or things like that?
They're so critical they wouldn't get an award.
Or they might not be preferred. I don't know if that is part of your criteria at all.
I mean, we do have some guardrails around how we define an anchor institution at the state, but the legislation that established our grant program allows us to consider other anchor institutions besides the ones that they've listed. So it's fairly flexible, and I think there aren't necessarily any that are off the table. We just look for that greatest benefit between climate, social, and infrastructure vulnerabilities. We have had some projects that are just unsuccessful, but I think it's just because they don't meet that rubric or criteria, not because of the type of facility that they are.
And I wanted to follow up on some of Commissioner Plant's questions on just systems and connecting dots in places. I think I saw that your scoring process does include risk. And so how similar or different is that from Wildfire Map? And are you seeing like different utilities have their own perceptions of risk that might be different? Like are you looking at sort of a statewide approach, or is it connected in with how like utilities are thinking about risk regardless of the utility?
Yeah, I think we have a lot of different models of risk that we provide on our tool. CDPHE has a climate vulnerability flag. FEMA has a national risk index, which I haven't seen be as accurate just because it is a national index. I think it doesn't have all of the data that some of our local indices have. We have the Colorado Forest Service Forest Atlas mapping tool, which is the most robust, which is also what is building out the map for the Wildfire Resilience Code Board. And there's a number of others. So yeah, we leave the definition of risk up to the applicant. And, they can summarize the community, the hazards that they're facing. It's not just wildfire, it's also extreme heat, especially on the Eastern Plains. We at the state, so that climate preparedness roadmap does map some of those most vulnerable communities. So yeah, there's also the ESHMP, the Enhanced State Hazard Mitigation Program. There's local hazard mitigation plans. There's just so many different levels of plans and resources and data that we prioritize Colorado EnviroScreen, but we also allow applicants to use their own narrative of who their most vulnerable communities are. They report if they have the utility data on the number of blackouts and brownouts that the region has experienced. So yeah, there's really no one definition of risk that we use.
And you were also mentioning the code board. Was that new construction only or also existing construction?
New construction and significant renovations.
And is that going to be a model code that local jurisdictions would then have to adopt, or is that's not imposed at the state level, right?
It is a statewide code.
It will be statewide. Okay.
Yeah, and all local jurisdictions that have a WUI, wildland urban interface, mapped in their region will have to adopt that code. They can come up with an alternative map that is more accurate if they don't see the state map as being fitting. But yeah, that's going to be a statewide code.
And then for existing buildings, I think there are other certifications or things that they would look at for mitigation.
So a lot of resources that I'm sure Daniel Beveridge tomorrow during the Colorado State Forest Service can talk about, but it is voluntary. There's also FACO, the Fire Adapted Communities, that does a lot of work across the state that is related to wildfire mitigation at a community level. So where the Wildfire Resilience Code Board is more focused on the parcel level, there's those community spaces that different volunteer groups oftentimes will run. But yeah, different local jurisdictions otherwise have different efforts and plans. Boulder County has a really strong community wildfire program. So yeah, it varies.
And I think that's all my questions. Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you, Ms. Crandall. Do any of the parties have questions for Ms. Harden? Hearing none. Thank you for joining us today. Greatly appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you all.
Take care. Let's see who's next on our agenda.
I wouldn't mind a break.
Is 5 minutes enough or do you need 10?
10 would be good.
All right, let's come back in 10 minutes at 2:55. Thanks. Welcome back. I have our next presenter, Mr. Jones. Are you ready? Is it Mr. Duarte? Ms. Crandall, who's next?
You've got it right, Chair.
Okay.
Mr. Jones and Mr. Duarte together.
All right. Thanks. We're ready for you if you want to jump in, sir. Thanks for joining us. Greatly appreciate it.
Can you hear me all right?
We can.
Okay, great. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, my name is Vaughn Jones, and within the Division of Fire Prevention and Control, I'm the Chief of Wildland Fire Management. Our division director, Mike Morgan, couldn't be here. He's down at the Capitol today, I think testifying on some other things. So I'll be doing the presentation. And then also with me is Paul Duarte. He's one of our deputy chiefs of wildland fire, and actually a lot of the things in this mitigation plan. We have some similar programs that are under Paul, so he'll kind of be chiming in as needed with some of the details and the technical aspects. And I am going to use some of the planned time to give an overview of our agency. I think it maybe has some value, to learn about what we do, the overlap with our programs. So I'll kind of just dive into that and then comment on the plan. We are in the Department of Public Safety, led by Executive Director Stan Hilke. So some of our sister divisions are State Patrol, Bureau of Investigations, Homeland Security, Emergency Management, Division of Criminal Justice, and then us as DFPC. And really, Colorado moved to this model of having the state's fire agency be housed within public safety back in 2012. And we really think it has a lot of merit and makes sense. Obviously, wildfire is always going to be strongly connected to natural resource management. But as we all know, unfortunately, you look at the scale, the complexity, the impacts of fires, and then when we're impacting towns and communities, it has become a public safety model. So we think there's some merit there, like I said, and you're actually seeing more states around the country programs either moving towards more of a full-on public safety model or something that's a hybrid with an increased, emphasis on the public safety piece. At DFPC, we do work very closely with our partner agencies at the Colorado State Forest Service, the Department of Natural Resources, to coordinate our programs where they overlap, particularly things like prescribed fire, fuels treatments, forest management, and I believe you're scheduled to hear for both of those entities tomorrow. So that's kind of the big picture. And then as you move into our division, we usually always start off by saying it's important to note that DFPC is more than just wildfire. We're the state's fire agency. Wildfire, good, bad, or otherwise, gets a lot of the credit or the attention just because of the high profile nature of fire, some of the dollars associated with it, and then also the resources and programs we've been fortunate to develop over the last 10 years. And the division started out in the mid 1980s, and then, like I mentioned earlier, in 2012, through legislative action, the DFPC, as it's kind of comprised now, was created with really the intent of having all state level fire programs housed in one agency so we could better serve the fire departments in the counties and our partners. So really quickly, I'll just touch on what some of our other sections within DFPC do. We have our fire and life safety section, which is actually does many of the functions that a traditional state fire marshal's office will do. Fire, building, life safety codes. And in particular, we have authority and jurisdiction over public schools, junior colleges, healthcare facilities, and some of the limited gaming. We do regulate fireworks sales in the state. And then a big one that we just started within the fire and life safety section is fire investigations. We've really ramped up our capacity with new FTE, some canines who are actually our most popular employees because everybody pretty much loves dogs. But really the intent of that group is to be available to support local jurisdictions across the state for cause and origin. So that's kind of that piece. The next one is professional qualifications and training. They do voluntary certifications for the traditional structured fire, hazardous materials, fire officers. Again, it's a voluntary program, but we are the accrediting body and manage those certification programs. And we also have live fire and driving simulator props that we take out to rural Colorado to take the training to them and run some programs, also grant programs to provide basic PPE to those firefighters. The last section before wildfire is the Center of Excellence for Advanced Technology and Aerial Firefighting. It's a long word, so our title. So we use COE for Center of Excellence, located over in Rifle. It's the research and development arm of DFPC. And really what they do is research, evaluate new technologies, and really try to find better and more efficient ways for us to prepare for and manage fires. Some things they're working on, in particular of note, are unmanned systems or drones, how we get data, air to ground links to the folks on the ground. And then a current effort they're going is called COTAC, which is to provide real lifetime tracking and locations of fire resources and other public safety resources on scene. And then also, as you just heard, we have the Wildfire Resiliency Code Board. It's not a DFPC board, it's a stakeholder board. DFPC is not a member of it, but we do administer and manage that board. So there's kind of the division, and then I'll go into the wildland section a little bit. Really, our priority is to assist and support local agencies, particularly counties and fire departments, with pretty much anything, under wildfire management, administration, technical support, preparedness planning, response, prescribed fuel, or prescribed fire and fuels management. And then we also play a pretty key role coordinating with our federal partners and in our adjacent states in the Rocky Mountain area. And again, really with that emphasis on those local agencies, we try to have strong relationships with them, and just provide them whatever support they need, even from Denver Fire needs a little bit of support from us to those small communities around in rural Colorado need a lot. So that support's provided by our district staff that we have around the state. And then with all of those functions, and then in particular, we do provide response funding assistance and state resources for both initial attack and then those large fires that go extended attack. It's kind of a big function of our staff out there. We do have operational resources. We have hand crews, engines, both fixed wing and rotor wing aircraft in our overhead. And really the idea for us at DFPC on why we have those resources is we want some baseline level of resources that are under our control and are not assigned by the federal agencies based on that national priority. So we at least have something that we know we kind of control and do here. I think I'll skip a couple of these things. A lot of another big role for us is incident business management. With the interagency nature of fire, there's federal, state, local, county, private entities all responding to fire. So therefore, there's a lot of billing and reimbursement. So basically, if there's a fire in Colorado that has bills to be paid, or for our resources that go out of state and help other partners, all of that billing gets funneled through us. So kind of just another layer there. We do have maybe getting a little closer to the proposal here. We have a fire planning branch that includes prescribed fire. We kind of set the guidelines and the formal rules where other state agencies to do prescribed fire on our property, as state agencies or with our employees, they have to abide by. And then it's also standards for local governments. We have what we call our multi-mission aircraft. These are not firefighting airplanes. They are intelligence gathering that we use. They're staffed by our firefighters to detect new fires. And then where we have existing fires, provide kind of some real-time monitoring, near real-time updates on those fires. We have an intelligence unit, which is really relatively new, Paul. I think in the last year and a half, And basically, we are looking at various tools, technologies, and systems to help with, both pre-incident and during response. And a lot of what those folks do is they compile indices, they do fire behavior modeling, summarize values of risk, and really try to get those products out to the boots on the ground, the fire managers and the firefighters where it matters. But in particular, what we're trying to do is really focus on, within the first 30 to 60 minutes of a fire being detected, getting that information out to them so they can make some informed decisions. We use a variety of tools, including the FireGuard program, which uses military assets. And Colorado is one of 2 centers in the country that provide those services, around the rest of the state. And then quickly, I'll try to wrap this up. We have a fire resources branch, which is basically dispatch and mobilization. This is a new thing, again, within the last year and a half. And a key here is this is how we took some recommendations from the Colorado Fire Commission and have really basically developed a statewide and regional mutual aid system for fire. And this is when, 911, local fire agencies, that's the bulk of the response. They take care of business every day. Most of us don't even know about it. But when things elevate and they need things outside of their local area, they come to kind of us as the state and our interagency partners to get them those extra resources when their local capacity has been exceeded. So we now have, for the first time, state dispatchers in our interagency dispatch system. And really the intent there is to increase that capacity as the wildfire problem kind of grows and to meet the needs looking into the future. And then an important thing that we try to emphasize is I think the dispatch and the intelligence goes hand in hand. When we have fires we want to get to them really quickly, and kind of leverage the intelligence and the dispatch to kind of make things happen in an informed manner. Let's see here. And then just quickly, again, and then I'll get into the plan comments here. I think you all know it. There's no silver bullet or solution for the wildfire program or the problem. And just suppression, fighting our way out of it's not going to happen. Traditional mitigation alone, fuel treatment is not going to happen or solve it by itself. And we kind of like to think of a definition of mitigation that's anything that reduces the likelihood or severity of an event. So you start getting into things like hardening of communities and infrastructure, public education, vegetation management, consequence management, recovery, training, preparedness, and then all of that with technology. And really kind of, our mantra is it took us decades to get into this problem. And honestly, even with, holistic, sustained, significant investments from all levels, from the federal government down to state, local, individual homeowners, we're going to have to make significant investments over probably several decades to slow that trajectory of where wildfires going, and then eventually get it to where we're reducing the impacts of unwanted fires. So I know that was really quick and dirty, but kind of a rapid fire summary of our agency, and really kind of, we're trying to use those new technologies to detect fires early, help with decision support. Where we don't want fires, we're going to take early, informed action and really hammer them with rapid initial attack to keep that duration, size, and cost down. And then have some resources that are under Colorado's needs and our control. And then we mobilize them through an intelligence-based dispatch system to meet the needs of the state on a year-round basis. So I may or may not have breathed when I just said all that. So I'm gonna pause for a second before I get into just a handful of comments we have on the plan. Are there any questions or clarifications, or Paul, did I miss anything there?
I definitely don't think you missed anything.
And I'll thank you for your service while you're taking a breath. So appreciate it, sir.
All right. Well, thank you. We're glad to do it. And you can tell we kind of like what we do. We think it's important, and we like talking about it. So thank you. I think getting to the plan really, I think overall, we think it's obviously very comprehensive. It's well thought out and it's a thorough plan. And I think hopefully with that rundown of our agency that I just gave you, I think there's a lot of important factors and elements in that proposed plan that have some overlap with us or things we're trying to do. And, a key thing, I think, regardless of, what may or may not happen with this plan, we think, and we feel pretty strongly there are opportunities and will be for, both us as DFPC and other fire agencies and all of the utilities to collaborate and work together to address this wildfire issue. And I'm not going to comment on a lot of the parts of the plan. They're certainly all valid and are needed. They just kind of don't overlap with our program. So we're not going to talk about all of it. But, jumping right into it, I think, that one comment in some discussions we've had internally, when you look at the wildfire risk assessment and the quantitative framework, we had some discussions on the emphasis and the weighting of structures versus other values. And I think we're kind of in alignment with the plan as far as, we fully recognize the impact of wildfire on watersheds and other values. But if you have to start using something that, is on a prioritization basis, we do support the emphasis of structures and communities, as if you have to get down into it, from that mapping and risk assessment standpoint. We think there's value and kind of would concur with that piece of the framework there. Moving into the situational awareness, again, we feel some of the role when you look at the staffing and the expertise. I think we would recognize the value and support, if there's a need for the utilities or Excel in this case to add staff and expertise. With that said, and this will be kind of probably our main theme through these comments, we would definitely encourage partnering and coordinating together to leverage whatever resources we have. Again, I think, as you all know, wildfire is very interagency in nature. No one agency, even the federal government, can do it all. So I think we need to leverage resources, reduce redundant or duplicative efforts. And I think, share best practices. And then there are a lot of different systems out there. So I think anytime we can share data, systems, best practices, that's important. One thing in the situational awareness, and I believe this is due to the document, really being a higher level general overview of the plan, but I think in particular where we can, things you may see on the TV about high fire danger or red flag warnings. Those aren't the best metrics in the world. And a lot of our folks have some really more advanced metrics and indices that we use. And so I think, within this plan, and I'm kind of assuming they will be doing that. But as we do this, I think we really need to get into using that best data and science that we can. And again, if and when needed at DFPC, we're willing to help reviewing and compiling and putting the partners together in the same room. So that's the situational awareness piece. The idea or the proposal of adding weather stations, we would be supportive of this concept. In general, the more data you have, especially when you look at site-specific locations, an example, that's going to help both for the pre-incident planning and then especially during fire occurrence to get a better feel for what the projected fire behavior is going to be, what that fire is going to do and maybe impact. And I think with this weather station, again, we have some of those systems on our side. Other entities around the state have them. And I think, again, we would just like to encourage options to, partner and coordinate between, the utilities, fire agencies to make sure we know what data elements are being collected and have a way to use those. The next piece under the situational awareness, I think, is the cameras. One thing we try to point out is there's no one technology or product or piece of hardware or equipment that meets all of these fire needs, and we need to think of things as a tool in the toolbox concept, because depending on the persistence of those observations, the duration, how often it returns, things like satellites over a site, the accuracy, the mapping, limitations of things like clouds or smoke. No one tool does it all. But with that said, within that system, we at DFPC do support the use of these cameras. They bring a lot of value to the table. And there is no one statewide network out there or one entity that runs all of the cameras. There's from local government on up using those. And so kind of our recommended approach with these cameras would be, I think we should set some minimum standards and best practices for what those cameras should be able to do. And then in particular, look at the options for sharing the data and the video feeds and whatnot, particularly as fires first occur. And then you're kind of maximizing what they can do. And a good example of that is actually, we already are currently partnering with Pano AI and Excel they've given us access to their existing camera network, and it's really been super successful. Again, especially during that early detection of a fire, we have that process to get the data, look at it quickly, and help us use in our projections on what that fire may or may not do. And I think, and again, along the lines of the cameras and sharing and being good partners, I think in the plan there was a lot of reference to OEMs and public safety, and just kind of a commentary of mine. And we heard some the earlier presenter. There's a lot of players and entities in fire, from the consequence management to the Department of Health to the recovery, all of that. And I think just when it comes to some of the weather stations and the cameras, it's just really important that we don't get it routed through the wrong system, and we understand that it's those fire departments, the federal agencies, the state firefighting agencies that really need to get that data very, very, very quickly so we can take action and move. Let's see here. Another piece on that the situational analysis piece is the TechnoSilva, the fire modeling software. We have looked at DFPC, have actually looked into that product, and we think it has a lot of value for both pre-fire planning and then in fire response. And in particular, it's that artificial intelligence piece and the learning component to try to run these simulations and learn from actual events to move ahead. And we've actually been looking into a little bit for a while now into options to try to get that TechnoSilva fire analyst and some other tools on a statewide basis. And I think I'm getting a little closer to the end here. Just a few comments on the idea of an emergency management resources and wildfire command center that were in the plan. Again, I understand it's kind of a broad overview plan. We're assuming a lot of when they refer to the coordination and the response piece, that a lot of that was focused on the utility resources, in relation to their infrastructure, their electrical supply, assessing damage, things like that. If there was an intent to get more onto the command center of the actual fire response, we would really think it's important that we have the right people talking together so that we're being efficient and we're not being duplicative or adding confusion to that initial response or unnecessarily involving the wrong entities. And I think I may be getting to the end here. Yeah, and then really getting to the power safety shutoffs, and this will tie into some of my previous comments, and you all probably know as well or more than me. that those power safety shutoffs they're a very big significant deal, and we understand that. We also recognize, that at times there is a need for those to occur. But I think, like I mentioned earlier, it's absolutely critical when those that, outside of the coordination piece, this would be where, more of the Office of Emergency Management and those folks come in. But if we're going to make that decision to do the power shutoff, I think we absolutely have to have the best data, the advanced modeling, the highest level indices being used, so that we only, do these when it's absolutely necessary, and we truly have a period of really high elevated likelihood potential for bad unwanted fires, and not just on a day maybe when the wind blows or it's a little bit dry or something like that. So we need to use those advanced tools. I think we would be at DFPC just interested in knowing, some of those parameters and criteria and break points for when the shutoffs occur. But again, it's that idea of only do it on the really bad days, not just crying wolf and shutting off the power every time the wind blows. So I think with that said, really that's kind of the comments that stood out to us as far as, the review of the plan. Again, overall, it's very comprehensive and detailed. And I think hopefully then, as you probably feel, I think there's, from our standpoint, it's just a big key is that where appropriate, we have some leveraging of resources, working together, and then communicating and coordinating with those right fire response agencies. So I think with that said, I'll stop there. Paul, anything from you, or just open it up to questions at this point?
And nothing additional for me at this point.
Well, thanks a lot. So it sounds like you're pretty happy with what the company's doing, the situational awareness, the communication, the shutoffs. Any thoughts on sort of the hardening of the distribution system, the undergrounding, or is that sort of more in our world and not in your world? Do you see that as a major risk from where you are, or you sort of don't get into that and you mainly mobilize once the fire started?
It's more in your realm, I think, but I think we do whether it's the lines themselves or, some of your facilities, that hardening component is absolutely critical. And then Paul, I don't know, from a operational standpoint with buried lines or anything, any thoughts from you on that?
Yeah, so from an operational aspect, the buried lines are great. I mean, the less lines we have above ground, for sure. The important thing is having an understanding of where those reside. Because once we do, if we're fighting fires from the air, it's one thing. But then when we also introduce, bulldozers and heavy equipment to a mix, it's important to have a really early understanding that, yeah, you don't see a visible power line here, but you do have the indicators out there that these do exist. I know they're buried quite deep, but in the event something bad, it's always good to have that basic information where those things reside. So operationally, the hardening and the underground is definitely a positive thing.
All right. Any other thoughts about where we could be doing better as a regulated system? It seems like we've made a lot of progress in the last 8 or 10 months since the Boulder fire. Any specific advice about shortcomings or things the commission should be focused on?
Paul, do you have something?
I just speaking at the operational level, I feel like there's been really good conversations that take place when we have incidents and things that are going on. I think just continuing to be a strong proponent of that is making sure that we're getting that solid communication with the providers to the fire departments, the incident management teams, those that are out there doing things, because if we have the right people at the table, we can be very proactive and not just shutting down large swaths, easy for me to say, of electricity or gas, but we can have really good conversation and say, hey, here's what we're predicting, here's what we see happening. We're maybe 8, 10, 12 hours away from needing to have an impact there. So we're not having those huge impacts on the folks that are being provided the service. And so I think if I could say anything, it's just continue to reinforce the importance of communicating at the ground level with the decision makers when incidents are actually happening.
Commissioner Goman.
Oh, you're on mute, Vaughn.
No.
Now I can hear you. Nope.
Can't hear you.
Oh, why don't you go, Commissioner Plant, and we'll see if we can figure out Commissioner Goman's audio and video. I can see you. I can't hear you. You want to go,
You
Commissioner?
can't hear me?
Oh, now I can hear you.
Yeah, I was saying I couldn't hear Mr. Jones, but
Oh, go ahead, Commissioner Goman. And
Okay.
Mr. Jones, you're on mute.
So I'm curious, Ms. Duarte, kind of lay me out a broad sketch of what your interaction looks like with the utility during like a fire incident now. What sort of regular contact is there? What sort of information are you trying to get from them? And then as you go through that, I know you talked a little bit with the chair about specific areas of improvement, but like kind of more granular in each of those, what those interactions look like throughout an incident.
Sure. And I think you could look at it and there's a whole bunch of layers to it. It's definitely an onion. When it starts at a smaller incident, say it's even a structure fire that starts on a windy day, having those initial providers that come in and shut down power either to a single structure, or, pull a meter, do that kind of stuff, have those conversations of here's what we see happening next. So it starts right at the ground level of, usually the electric folks rolling up pretty quickly being, 15, 20, 30 minutes, they usually get on scene. We have a conversation of saying, hey, here's what we need. They're usually very proactive and they're shutting down things as we need it. As an incident begins to evolve, we try and have cooperator meetings with folks that are involved. So the the power companies, if there's, commissioners, whatever needs to happen, we start talking about them and we say, hey, where are your vulnerable areas that we need to really pay attention to? Or how long would it take you to shut off this chunk of ground, those types of things. So we start having those conversations and building some timelines out saying, all right, if it crosses this line, we'll let you know. So that gives you enough time to do what needs to take place in those. So it's very on the ground conversations at that point, very specific to usually shutting off, sections of power, identifying where there's gas issues, or if there's infrastructures that are really critical that we need to protect, and those types of things. So it's very, very tactical conversations on the incidents itself.
I know you generally in direct contact with people of a high enough level to be able to give you the information you need and act upon what you tell them.
I feel like 99% of the time, it seems like we have the right people in the room. And we always end up with, depending where we're at within the state, it could be a co-op, or it could be Excel, it could be a whole bunch of different people. So we try and get the right, and I think they find out really quickly by the questions we're asking if they're the right person in the room. And if they don't, they seem to be very, very good about getting in contact with the people that can make those decisions. But I'll be honest, I can't think of a time where I or others have asked, hey, can we shut this off or do that we've ever been told no. They understand that we may not only be looking to protect the infrastructure, but we may be protecting firefighters and the people who are there. And so they're very proactive and being really good about that. So I can't think of any times in my very long career where we've ran into issues of them not being, extremely helpful.
Okay, great. And then just curious, in their plans, Excel's kind of redesigned or classified the highest risk areas, especially as it relates to public safety power shutoffs. And I know Mr. Jones had talked about more advanced modeling to determine the risks. I know the company is utilizing some modeling that they displayed for us last month, I think it was. So I'm curious, has the company reached out to you at all in designing those high-risk areas? Do you have any kind of differences of opinion, I guess I would say, in where the highest or persistent highest risk areas are compared to maybe what they've displayed?
So I can start and then Chief Jones could maybe expand on it. I think the important thing when it comes to the modeling portion and looking at those different layers, you could probably ask 10 different people and get a slightly different answer on what they see as the granular part of which is more at risk. But I think if you look at it holistically, folks are ending up with the same things with all these different models. They're utilizing mainly the State Forest Service products that are out there, which is good, and we support that 100%. It's when you start getting down to the parcel size where all bets are off. One person sees this tree as a problem and another person doesn't see it as a problem. But I think holistically, I feel like they're in the right ballpark for sure.
And Paul, can you hear me now? I'm on my phone. Okay.
Yep.
Fix that. Yeah, I would agree with what Paul said. And I think, again, Dan Beveridge, I think, is testifying tomorrow from the State Forest Service, and he'll really have some good insight there. But like Paul said, whether it's the state, the U.S. Forest Service, all models are a little different depending on what you put in and what you're after. But again, looking at what they had, where the XL service areas are, it's somewhat intuitive when you start looking at values at risk and fuels, like Paul said, on a big scale. I think their risk mapping's in line with a lot of most of the other systems we see out there.
Thanks, that's helpful. I'm glad we got your audio back. Helpful. One other question, I know Chief Jones have brought up that it would be helpful to have like kind of minimum standards and best practices, especially as it relates to these AI cameras and other tools around what they're able to do, how the data can be shared, perhaps even who it's shared with, under what circumstances, etc. So if we're looking at a major investment, I mean, we already have some, looking at a major investment in more, I guess, how far off is that? What does that process look like to make sure we're not spending ratepayer money on not the exact right tools or system? Like, I don't want to end up with this hodgepodge. I want everything to work together as well as possible. So just curious from you, do you already know what the minimum standards should be, or is this like a process that needs to happen? And how might that happen so that as we're authorizing investments, we can be sure that they fit to the best kind of standards and framework there?
I think, Paul, I would say, and again, it's again, this whole challenge with the wildfire is, 375 fire departments, 64 counties, one state, federal agencies, all the utilities. That's a big role that we play. But I think, Paul, I would be, and not promoting any one company's product or anything, but those cameras that XL is using right now are at the top of the performance standards in the industry. So they would, our concerns or recommendations to have it integratable and usable, those particular products and like I said, we're already partnering and using those. So I Paul, any other details as far as minimums or anything like that?
So over the last couple of years, the Center of Excellence in our intelligence shop have actually worked on building some of those minimum standards, and what they're currently utilizing and looking at it meets that.
Okay, great. That's helpful. Just that I want to move us forward, backwards or on a treadmill or anything. I think just one more question from me. In the circumstance where you have a PSPS or for whatever reason the power is out, could be the fire itself, and an actual fire circumstance. Are you concerned, or what coordination do you expect during that to ensure that your firefighting resources, like access to working hydrants and pumped water and communication systems, are available? Like, do you feel like you have that coordination to ensure, like, if there was a PSPS and it shut off water pumping to an area you need water, do you feel like more coordination is needed in that area, or that's not an area to be concerned?
When it comes to the water situation, I think it's really important to recognize that sometimes there's a misconception. Obviously, we want all the water we can get, but it's very rarely in a large fire situation in an urban interface or where there's usually hydrants, since there's homes there, that we have the ability just to attach to a fire hydrant and fight the fire from a static position. That's really a misnomer. If anything, we're getting water from the closest local resource, and then we're moving to the fire and doing that kind of stuff. So yes, it's critical that we have the the ability to get water as close as we can, but we also recognize that fire trucks don't just tie into a fire hydrant and stand in front of a 400-foot flame and fight fire. That's kind of the press has blown that one a little bit out of a proportion in some other places, but it's critical that we have those conversations, and we know that if we shut off power to that it's going to have an impact within the footprint of the area. So that communication part, like we talked about earlier, the tactical portion of it is super important. But I feel like we have really good conversations, and that's one of those things where we can say, hey, do we need to do some more hardening around your substation to make sure that we continue to have water? Those are the conversations that are happening. Then we can focus some folks on that versus just saying shut off everything. And they're usually very good about saying, if we shut that off, here's your impacts on those other things. And so I feel like the communication's been good, but it just needs to continue to happen for sure.
And Paul, I think the only thing I would add is, and the difference there with a lot of this is what Paul said is absolutely right. It's more challenging in the first couple 4-6 hours of a fire to make all of that happen. But, typically as we get to the end of, a first day or certainly the second day, all of that. But everything we do from the detection to the initial response and the dispatching, those first few hours is really where the challenges come into play, and any pre-existing relationships or networks or whatever, that's where those pay dividends. But Paul hit it on.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, hand to Commissioner Plain.
Thanks. Appreciate it. And I don't have too many more questions. I was just I was curious, as I look at the wildfire mitigation plan, particularly the technological investments that are in there, it seems like the ones that are really critical to integrate with you are the cameras for identification and quick response, and then the like the TechnoSilva kind of stuff for evaluating fire behavior based on the weather forecast and things of that nature. And so I think Chief Jones, you were saying that you've looked at, I think you said that you have some things like that on your side, that you were also looking at TechnoSilva. I'm just wondering, how should we be thinking about this? Is it better for the state to basically have a system that is sitting up on the top and the utility as a component is a part of that system? Or should we be developing these parallel systems that maybe can communicate with each other? Or should, what's the best way for us to think about this? I mean, we're utility commissioners, so we're looking at our little piece over here, but we want to make sure that we're not looking at it in isolation. And, if there's a sort of a system that's going to work not just for, Excel, but all the other, 48 utilities in the state, is there something that we can do that would tie into your systems more effectively, or, is this just something that you guys are going to develop in parallel?
All right, making sure. Great question. And Paul certainly chime in here, particularly on the Techno Silva piece. I think, and there's been legislation like over the last several years for even a pilot state camera system, and that hasn't gone through for a variety of reasons, and it gets into the question what's the state's role or not in being in charge of hosting all of this, and we really think, again, it's a little bit of a PC answer, but any one entity does not have, is not going to be overseeing and in charge of all this. I think you take what, the resources the federal agencies have, we as the state, and then I think where, in my mind, the model that would make sense for the utilities that are interested in enabling, able to do this, it's using those agreed upon best practices, science and technology, and support their service areas, and eventually build out something on a, ultimately the ideal would be a statewide basis that's all integrated and the right folks have access to that. I think that's conceptually, that's the model. It's not easy necessarily, but I think it's the most likely and probably in reality with all the entities, the most practical model we should shoot for. But Paul, anything to add to that, particularly maybe on the fire behavior modeling software and that?
Yeah, I think you hit it really well. And I mean, when we look at fire statewide, where the entities are looking at it in their corridors and some buffering around that. So having the ability to have a holistic approach and look at it from a statewide level is great, but we understand that what they're looking for is some very specific places and areas, and doing some modeling there. So yeah, it's a big lift for one entity to do all of that. But when we look at it across, border to border, for us to be able to come up with the same information they're looking for in a smaller area.
So in your view, it's I mean, they're looking at, maybe the fire behavior and the Techno Silva modeling in order to figure out where they're going to de-energize. But, the fire districts might be looking at data where they're going to harden up, perimeters, where they're going to send crews, where they're going to, send out, evacuation orders and all that sort of thing. And I'm just wondering, is it the same system, or is it, or do we have two different systems that are operating in that scenario?
So currently, the state, we're utilizing a different program. Wildfire is the one we're utilizing. It's not as robust as the Techno Silva one. In a perfect world where people were throwing money at DFPC, we would also invest in the Techno Silva one after doing the research that we've done.
That's not your problem. People aren't throwing too much money at you.
I'm not going to go on the record saying that, but no, I think you hit it on the head, though. I think that in a lot of cases, whether it's the cameras, weather stations that we already use or somebody develops, or the modeling, the right system can meet multiple needs for protecting infrastructure, pre-planning fuels treatments and evacuation routes, or when things are happening, we're modeling that fire behavior and making decisions based on that. So I think the right tools and the right systems will meet multiple needs as long as it's integrated and we're not creating multiple disparate systems across the state.
Great. And do you think that, I mean, I recognize that the Techno Silva system is maybe a little more capable than the current system that you're using, but in doing the Techno Silva and that system, are we creating a duplicative system? I mean, for the purposes of what we're trying to accomplish?
Paul, do you want to take, you're more familiar with the ins and outs. Are you good taking that?
Yeah, so both of the systems work really, really well, and you get a good product. Right now, the research that we've done with TechnoSilva, it's just a bit more robust than the one we're utilizing. Again, in a perfect world, we would have multiple systems just so that we're making sure we're getting the best product out to the decision makers and the folks on the ground. So in a perfect world, we would continue to run both of those programs parallel without an issue if we could. And so we wouldn't put all of our eggs in one basket. We would want to keep both of those moving in the same direction because they both give very good information.
Does the, I can't remember what you call it, the Wildfire system, does that provide the utility with the information that they need to, plan their PSPS, or is it necessary that they invest in a additional system, recognizing it has more capability? But
I believe the more robust system is probably adequate. I mean, would be more appropriate than what we currently use does really good about predicting the spread of the fire, where the one that they're looking at, actually they can do a little more in-depth planning with the TechnoSilva model than they can with the Wildfire, from my understanding of how the programs both work. Both very good programs. The TechnoSilva just seems to be ahead of the game a little bit with the research that we've been doing.
thank you.
Ms. Crandall, questions for Mr. Jones, Mr. Duarte?
Thank you all. Maybe just a couple quick ones. This case discusses public safety power shutoffs, and I guess I was wondering, is that unique? Are there other kinds of essential services that have to be shut off in advance of a fire or other kind of natural disaster? And if so, how are those decisions typically made? And there may not be a good answer to this. I've sort of struggled to think of an analogy.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Could you say that again, Kelly, please? I'm not sure if I quite tracked the question.
Yeah, are there other essential services? So, water, wastewater, telecom, anything else that you might consider essential that also has to be managed or shut off to avoid fire or other risk that you're aware of?
I'm trying to think, Paul. I mean, and obviously, and I'm not just saying that because we're all here today, but obviously the electrical system, whether it's the wastewater, the comms towers, all of that, it has the most direct and wide-reaching impacts on things we look at. As far as fire goes, I'm trying, evacuations, shutting down highways, train routes. I'm trying to think of the preemptive shutoff, Paul, and a lot of it's more those other, infrastructure systems is, trying to harden them ahead of time, mitigate around them, and then protect them when the fire comes. I'm honestly not thinking of anything else preemptively, but Paul, am I missing anything you can think of?
Nothing that I can think of. I think you nailed them all. I mean, it's all those creature comforts that we all depend on now.
And I think that's it for me. Thank you. The commissioners, you all asked everything I was curious about.
Thank you. Any parties have questions? Well, I just want to thank you both so much for joining us. Greatly appreciate it. It seems like we're making lots of progress, and thank you. Thanks for your help.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon and appreciate having us.
Yep. Thank you. Commissioner Gellman, any final thoughts before we adjourn?
Just really appreciative of everyone who joined us today. I've been learning a lot and, dreaming up the best, best coordination here. But it's very helpful to really see and hear from all the folks working on all the different angles from, critical infrastructure to the actual fire response and emergency management functions to just get a bigger view of how this all works so we can ensure, as I had mentioned with them, that we keep moving forward and making sure every decision we make is as productive as possible, considering all the different aspects and players here. So look forward to resuming again in the morning.
Thank you, Commissioner Plant.
Yeah, I'd echo that. And, this is such a great an important thing for us to hear how our system fits within the larger system. And I think that, we saw certainly in the last PSPS where some of those weak links were. And so making sure that we try and address those in this process, I think is really important, as well as, preparing our communities for any impending wildfires and things of that nature, and how this system integrates with everything else that's going on. So I really appreciate folks coming and testifying today.
Likewise, and with that, we'll break and reconvene at 9 a.m. Tomorrow morning, Friday, February 21st. So thanks to both of you. Thanks especially to Ms. Crandall for putting this together, and see you tomorrow morning. Thanks all.